So I don't think people really understand the sort of addiction that you feel when you're doing data analysis. In my experience, whenever you start looking at data, uh, it inevitably means that you can't leave. There's always something that you're like, man, it'd be really easy if we could do this, and then you sort of pursue this thing, and it actually takes a lot longer than you think it does. Almost always takes hours instead of minutes. Um, you know, days instead of an hour. All data analysis, all programming, anything like that requires a lot more thought than you ever think it's going to be. Um, Most things, if you sort of try to translate it into computer code, which is one little doohickey thing, procedure at a time, most things actually are extremely complicated. And we don't really realize that when we're sort of looking at the world. We think it's super easy. But when you look at it and you try to get it done, it's almost inevitably many, many steps to actually get to a point. And, that's the thing that I've realized is that you might think that software is like super easy and programming is super easy and data analysis is super easy until you actually get it done. And when you do it, you realize like, man, it is a lot harder than you think it is. That's where I think like when you actually look at the real world, how the real world works, um, it's a lot different than the sort of theoretical views of the world. And it's that translation between the real world and, the theoretical views where you actually learn a lot of stuff. I inevitably always learn a ton where I'm like, okay, what was this or what happened here? And then you realize that there actually is a lot of steps that happen between the theoretical of sort of thinking this is the way that the world actually works, or this is how I read it's supposed to work, and you actually get it done. You realize it's just not that way. And that's the thing, like, so, I'm building the whole reciprocity project, right? And every step, everything that I put in, every function that we put in, I'm like, it'll be easy to do. And then you realize, weeks later that this one little button is a heck of a lot harder to do than you'd ever imagine it to do. Now, um, thankfully, I've got like a development team that's amazing. That's doing all the sort of heavy lifting. I wouldn't be able to do it myself. Um, I just don't have the time in this world. But getting somebody else to do this, I still realize, and it still is always like, oh my gosh, it's a lot harder than I thought it was. I almost always assume when I sort of make a request. Now I'm getting used to it. Like initially, it was like, what is going on? It's taking so long, and then I just have to stop and think and wait and say, hey, you know what? Everybody is sort of figuring this out. It's not easy to sort of figure things out, and it's a sort of step-by-step process. And if I was doing it myself, I feel, it would take me a long time as well. Yes, I would get better at it, but still, it takes an awful lot of work by the time you sort of put things together. And, data analysis is the same thing, right? And that's what makes it so addicting is that it always seems like super easy conceptually in your head, right? The sort of theoretical view of like, oh, I just got to do this, right? And then you realize like, oh, that's actually super hard. And I think that's where, we compare apples and oranges in this world because um, if we're sort of looking at productivity, for example, it's one thing to take a step back and sort of do one aspect of things, like writing, for example. That's like kind of easy. It's hard, but if you just do the one thing, then, you don't really have a good understanding that it's actually a lot more harder than, you don't realize everything. Other things are really hard and it's really slow and there's, so many steps and things. And I think that's kind of where I fit in with who I am is I'm very well aware of technical aspects, but also the sort of theoretical aspects of things and how hard it actually is. Um, and I think we need to, recognize that is a tough thing to do. Um, and I've become increasingly more aware that very few people recognize this, very few people understand it, that, it's a lot harder than you think it is. And there's only a handful of people in this world that sort of recognize that and understand it. Um, and so, you know, my ultimate point here is um, when you go in, start to jump into something, just expect it to take a long time, and it's going to be lots of work, and there's going to be lots of frustrations. And then once you sort of figure that out, you can take a step back and just give yourself some grace with the process, and know that it's okay to walk